Madam Chair. The elephant in the room here, I guess, at this point.
Are you making a motion?
Yes, I'm going to make a motion. I'll make a motion that we determine the students that are required to go to Pinkerton unless they're voluntary by lottery.
I'll second that.
And I'm going to speak to the motion, and I'm going to be perfectly honest. I picked lottery off the top of my head so that I could make a motion so that we could discuss this. But what we need to do is we need to decide, now that the Pinkerton contract has been passed, how we are going to determine these students if we do not have 75 willing students, and create a policy which will probably go into the future to take care of the much harder problem when the 10% arises. And I think it makes sense to start that pattern now so that when those people get there, it's been fair all along, that we're using that same criteria. But it was my feeling that this was going to be done before the Pinkerton contract was considered, like we did with the MOUs. But we went ahead and we passed the Pinkerton contract, so now I think we're compelled to create some criteria. I understand that Dr. Littlefield will assign everyone there. So the question then becomes, how do those people that don't want to go seek approval, and how do they get approval?
Is there any more discussion on this?
So I think it's a great idea, Dave. The problem is, we're here at the nth hour. We've already passed the contract, and we don't have this process in place. So the majority of this board that approved this contract, I think it's up to you now to determine how those children are going to be, for lack of a better word, forced to Pinkerton, that don't want to go to Pinkerton. You need to come up with the rules now. Thank you.
Is there any more discussion on this? With there being no more discussion, I will call this to a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
No. Motion fails 2-3.
What I'd like to say is, I threw out the motion about the criteria, and we got no discussion out of it. But what are we going to do? We need to set up some type of criteria. I threw out an idea, it got shot down. But I guess I'm looking to the rest of the board then to say, how do we determine who gets opted out? And I think that's going to be the next, the big question's been answered, the Pinkerton contract's moving ahead. Now the next question is, how's that determined? So when are we going to take this up? Do I need to just make motions and for different ideas, or?
I don't believe it's going to be an issue. That's the elephant in the room. That's exactly what I think. I don't think that we're not going to have 75 kids or plus.
So we're going on faith that we have 75 and we have no rule? So what happens then is, if the day that Dr. Littlefield assigns everybody to Pinkerton, then people apply to go to Manchester, all these other places, and he starts to approve them, or we approve them, and then it's first come, first served. Because when we get down to only 75 kids left, we can't do any more. We can't allow any more out if we only have 75 left. So by default, I would contend that this becomes first come, first served. Or first decision, I should say, because there is a process. Well, we don't have a process for that either.
Yes, Sharon.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the Londonderry MOU as amended.
I think it's important that this board understands, after what Dr. Littlefield just said, we have to consider all the scenarios, and the one scenario I'm curious about, and I know the public is going to ask me about, is if we have less than 75 students that want to go to Pinkerton, that basically we poll them and find out that we have, let's just say 50 for an argument number, how are we going, or I should say, how are you now going to determine who the 25 are that are going to be made to go to Pinkerton?
Is that a question of me?
Yes, it is. Because it's my understanding that you just said to this board that you are going to determine the process. Is that correct? Because we don't have a process.
No, I believe what I said was I would implement the policies that the board has adopted tonight. And the answer to the question is, if we end up, and I believe this question has already been asked of our attorneys, that's that same question, I'm not an attorney, that if we end up in the situation where we have fewer youngsters expressing a desire to attend Pinkerton than we are contractually obligated to send, I will make the board aware of your problem.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we allow the students wishing to go to Manchester the first right to opt out of going to Pinkerton. If I get a second, I'll speak to my motion.
I'll second it for discussion.
Again, it is, in my mind, it's crucial that we give direction on how this is going to happen. Maybe it won't happen. Maybe we'll have 80 kids. But we need to decide here. We've decided that this contract is worth pursuing and all. And we've accepted the limitations that are in that contract. But it's our responsibility as a board to tell the public how we are going to implement that. And Dr. Littlefield will implement a policy if he has one. But if he doesn't have one, he can't. And if we wait until it's a problem, that's not going to be the best way to solve it, because then we maybe even know people that are involved in the problem at that point. It's better to solve the problem now when there's no names with it, we have no ideas of numbers at all, and come up with a policy that's going to do it. I'm throwing this Manchester idea out here is to try again with this board to get some discussion or some movement on creating a policy, taking responsibility, and being the ones that say, this is the way we're going to do it, and there are people that don't like it, but that's our decision.
Yes, Ms. Jones.
I think David makes a very good point, because right now, there is nobody. Right now, we can assume as a board that we have 80 or 90 kids, so we're not going to run into this issue. If we do, though, I think it's better that we, before anybody comes to you and says, I'm one of those people, what can you do for me? And you say, well, where do you go to school? All right, let me see if I can help you out. We don't want to get into that. We just want to set a policy that Dr. Littlefield can follow through on, and basically treat these as, you know, as blind choices, if you will. So I think, David, you have got a great idea. It's proactive. The board should act on it, come up with a policy. It doesn't have to be complicated. And then Dr. Littlefield can just use that policy and implement it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
Well, part of the reason that I picked Manchester to have a priority here is that we have a history with Manchester. We just signed a 4-year tuition agreement with Manchester, and we're paying Manchester capital cost. Put together with just the fact that we probably have a large population that wants to remain at Manchester. But it's an idea, and it may not fly, but I guess my question is, what will? And as you're talking about things that Dr. Littlefield needs and the parents need for answers, things we need to do tonight, this is one of them. Because as we leave here tonight, it answers all the questions for those kids that want to go to Pinkerton. We have done that. But we haven't answered the questions for the other kids because they don't know if the criteria, so therefore they don't have an idea if they have a chance at going somewhere else or not.
Is there any more discussion on this motion? All those in favor, please signify.
I've just reached a point here where I am at total frustration. We're spending all this time discussing John Liscar's emails, and nobody on this board wants to discuss how the opt-out from Pinkerton that we just voted for, that was the biggest issue in this town, like it, don't like it, whatever, 75 of the 10%. And we're discussing John Liscar's email. This is why this board is dysfunctional, and this is why we can't get anything done here. And then when it's a big decision, we cram it into 2 minutes, and now we're gonna take a half an hour and talk about John's email. It seems as though we always wanna go home when it's either late or ugly, and we never get anything done. I think that we should try to finish our agenda tonight, and I also think that we need to talk about these 75 kids. I came here with an expectation that Pinkerton would probably pass tonight, and that was not what I really focused my discussion on as much. But I thought about how are we gonna decide for the opt-outs? Because if Pinkerton passes, we're gonna need that opt-out discussion. And we're not having it. And we're leaving everybody hanging with this indecision. So how do we say we're going home tonight when we haven't decided that? This board voted in a majority for Pinkerton. That's the will of the board, and I'm good with that now. But now we need to decide that question.